I've read some ridiculous tweets over the years, but reading tweets by Dr. Craig Considine is like sitting in the front row of a Gallagher show if Gallagher were smashing piles of rhinoceros dung instead of watermelons. If you read his tweets and didn't know that he was being serious, you'd think that he was doing some hilarious parody of a Western academic talking about Islam. This is the same guy who, a few years ago, compared Muhammad to George Washington in a Huffington Post article. We'll be looking at some of Dr. Considine's claims in future videos, but right now, let's examine his pinned tweet, his pride and joy. Dr. Considine, a sociology lecturer at Rice University, declares, Prophet Muhammad protected ethnic and religious minorities with all his might. A far, far cry from Trump's approach. For the record, I'm not a fan of any of our current presidential candidates, but I would take any of them in a heartbeat over the Prophet of Islam. I'd take Donald Trump over Muhammad. I'd take Hillary Clinton over Muhammad. I'd even take that guy who didn't know what Aleppo was over Muhammad. And the reason I would take pretty much any politician in U.S. history over Muhammad has to do with things like Muhammad's treatment of religious minorities. But according to Dr. Considine, Muhammad protected religious minorities with all his might. What rainbow did the tornado carry this guy's house over? Let's compare Donald Trump's treatment of religious minorities with Muhammad's treatment of religious minorities. Now, Trump has modified his position several times, but let's go with his most extreme position. The Donald's most radical proposal in this campaign was this.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
Again, he's modified his position, but his most severe pitch was to shut down Muslim immigration, not permanently, but until U.S. leaders can figure out what to do about terrorists. Whether you think that's a good idea or a bad idea, let's see how Trump's most extreme proposal compares with Muhammad's position. Sahih Muslim, 4594. Umar bin al-Khattab said that he heard the Messenger of Allah say, I shall certainly expel the Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula until I leave only Muslims there. Read that again so that the message sinks in. I shall certainly expel the Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula until I leave only Muslims there. Jews and Christians had been living on the Arabian Peninsula for centuries. What does Muhammad say? He only wants Muslims. Now imagine if Trump said something like that. Imagine if Trump did an interview tomorrow and said, I shall certainly expel Muslims from the United States of America until I leave only non-Muslims there. Dr. Considine would be furious, but for some reason when Muhammad says it, it's completely innocent. Interesting double standards. We'll talk about these double standards in a moment. Let's read another passage from the Cherub of Tolerance. Sahih Muslim, 126. It was narrated from Abu Huraira that the Messenger of Allah said, I have been commanded to fight the people until they bear witness that none has the right to be worshipped but Allah, and believe in me and that which I have brought. If they do that, their blood and wealth are protected from me, except for a right that is due, and their reckoning will be with Allah. If Donald Trump were to say, I have been commanded to fight Muslims until they bear witness that Allah is not God, Dr. Considine's head would explode. But when Muhammad says, I've been commanded to fight people until they become Muslims, Muhammad is somehow protecting religious minorities with all his might. Why the double standards? What do we read in the Quran? Surah 9, verse 73. O Prophet, strive hard against the unbelievers and the hypocrites and be unyielding to them. Strive hard in Arabic is a form of the word jihad. The Quran orders Muslims to wage jihad against unbelievers and hypocrites. This is no problem at all, according to Dr. Considine. But if Trump were to say, wage war against the Muslims and be unyielding to them, suddenly words would matter. Surah 9, verse 123. O you who believe, fight those of the unbelievers who are near to you and let them find in you hardness. Can you imagine the media uproar if Trump were to say, fight the Muslims who are near to you and let them find in you hardness. But when the Quran says it, the command to fight unbelievers is somehow a command to protect them. Surah 48, verse 29. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and those who are with him are severe against disbelievers and merciful among themselves. Those who are with Muhammad are severe against whom? Against people who violate the rights of religious minorities? No, they're severe against religious minorities. What kind of leprechaun does Dr. Considine have hiding in his pocket that he can simply wish away Muhammad's commands to violently subjugate the world? If Donald Trump were to say, those who are with the Donald are severe against Muslims and merciful among themselves, it would be clear proof that Trump is a bigot and a racist and a hate-monger and an Islamophobe. But when the Quran says it, it proves that Muhammad was the 7th century George Washington. Why do people like Dr. Craig Considine constantly move the goalpost for Islam? They move the goalpost for Islam because they're racists. They're racist against Muslims. I know what you're thinking, Islam's not a race. I would ordinarily agree with you, but I believe in consistency, so I'm holding Dr. Craig Considine to his claim that Islam is a race. He writes, maybe it's time we move beyond Islamophobia. Let's start using Islamo-racism, because this is no doubt racism. So, Islam is a race, but as we've seen, Dr. Considine has completely different standards for white Americans and for Arab Muslims. If you're a white American, he holds you accountable for your words and demands nothing but the best from you. If you're an Arab Muslim, well, we can't take anything you say seriously. We'll just pat you on the head and pretend you didn't say it at all. Now, having higher standards for white Westerners than you have for Arab Muslims, holding white Westerners accountable for their words, but letting Arab Muslims slide no matter what they say. What's the word for that again? I'd call up Dr. Considine and ask him to remind us what the correct word is, but I don't think he'd be able to answer because he's too busy being a racist. So, ladies and gentlemen, think whatever you want about Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, but if you're outraged at either of them for anything they've ever said or done, all the more should you be outraged at Muhammad, because he's said and done far, far worse. And if you're going to be upset with Trump or Clinton, but you're inclined to let Muhammad slide, be careful. You might be a racist.